Hey guys, Danny Johnson here, and today we're going to be changing the oil on this '04 Mustang Cobra. The process is pretty much the same on all Mustangs, and in general, most cars are the exact same way as well. One thing to make sure of is that the car has been warmed up so that the oil flows a lot better. So in this case, this car was just sitting in the garage, so I took it for a little drive around the neighborhood just to get it warmed up. And you just want to be careful as well as you're changing the oil that the oil will be hot, so you don't want to burn yourself. Also, you want to wear safety protection equipment like goggles and such so that you don't get any oil splashed in your eyes. We'll also be working with a jack stand and a floor jack, so you want to make sure that you properly secure the car on jack stands and just make sure that it's stable and not going to fall down on you. So go inside and pop your hood. Next we're going to go in and locate our oil cap. We're going to just break that loose, and we'll take it off when we're actually draining the oil, but right now I'll just leave it on there so no dust or anything gets down inside the engine. Now on this car, the oil filter is on the driver's side, so to help it drain better, we're actually going to be lifting on the passenger side of the car. And so we'll lift this in the air and put it on jack stands. Okay, so the car's in the air and properly secured, and I'll just show you how this is done again. Got our jack stand on that subframe connector. If you didn't have that, you'd just be on that beam. And then that's where we've lifted with the jack. We're gonna go ahead and keep the jack here just as an extra safety measure. Okay, so this next part is pretty important, and I think a lot of people strip their drain plug with this. If you'll notice on sockets, a lot of them have multiple points, and then some of them only have 6 point. This is what the head of the actual bolt looks like, so you want to be using a 6 point, not a multiple point. So on this car, either of these two sizes are going to work. You have a 16 millimeter or a 5/8. Both of them have a tiny bit of play still left in it, but you want to have a socket that pretty much fits right onto the oil drain plug. Okay, so at this point we're going to take our oil cap completely off, and if you want to just set it back down on it like that, you can. We just want it to vent so that as the oil's draining, it drains a little bit easier. So next, get your oil pan that we're going to be draining the oil into, and you can bring this under the car. Next, you want to find your oil pan and also its bolt, and here it is. Oil pan's directly underneath the engine. If you get to the transmission, you know you've gone too far, and there are sometimes also drain plugs on those, so you want to be careful, especially if you have a four-wheel or all-wheel drive car. But anyway, here's the oil pan right under the car. As you can see, it has that 6 point bolt on it, and so that's why we're using our 6 point socket here. And so we're going to go ahead and break this loose, turning it counterclockwise. And a trick that I like to use is to break it loose, then disconnect the ratchet, and then spin it using, that's why I like using a deep socket and then a little extension, because then you can spin it this way and kind of hold it against the oil pan, and you'll get a small drizzle, but then at one point you can put your finger over the top of that bolt and pull both of them away quickly, and that way you don't drop the bolt. Okay, so I went ahead and I broke that loose. Now we're going to slide our oil pan underneath here, and now we're just going to take this one out and try to make as little of a mess as possible. Be careful because the oil will kind of shoot out far and then draw its way back in. So you want to have the pan kind of over a ways to catch it, and then watch it, and as it continues to drain, move the pan back under it. Okay, so once you get this loose enough where you don't really need the ratchet, go ahead and bring the pan over, loosen it by hand, and once you pretty much feel like it's all the way out, put your finger over the top of it to hold the bolt on, and then just pull this away and catch the oil in the pan. So now as this drains, it's going to start slowing on the flow. It's not going to be coming out as far, and you want to follow it with the pan. I have the pan pretty much right here at the edge of that to where it's only going to go more towards the pan, so we're good. Okay, so once the oil is pretty much all the way drained out, we're going to go ahead and we're going to put this drain plug bolt back in, and then we're going to take the oil filter off. So at this point, we're not putting this in for good, because once we take the oil filter off, you're still going to have a little bit in here, depending on how the pressure works once you take the oil filter off. So we're just putting this in hand tight for now, just so that we can move the drain plug, or just so that we can move the drain pan underneath the oil filter. So that's your next step, is to locate your oil filter. Now here's a new oil filter out of the box. I'm just going to show you this outside the car so it'll be easier to see. But they make different kind of oil filter wrenches if you need them. And so what you'll do on this kind is you would wrap it around, and it's kind of like a belt that you tighten up. So once you get it looped through here, then you would tighten up all the slack out of it, and then as you turn it, it would help turn the wrench. Okay, so that's one of the ways you can do it. They also have these that you can buy, but they only fit up to certain oil filters. I think this was a Fram one that I had, and basically, you know, you'd put it on the back of the oil filter that way, and then it has a place to put a wrench in and turn it. So either way, but before you go out and buy one of these, you want to make sure that either the new filter you're putting on at least will accept this, because it doesn't work on all of them. So remember, the oil filter is going to be pretty hot down there, since the car should be having the oil change when it's warm so that it flows a little bit better. And so if you want to try doing it by hand, you can. If you need to get one of these tools to wrap around it and help yank it off, then you may have to do that as well. This threads on clockwise, and it's going to come off counterclockwise. Okay, so I have this wrench wrapped around the oil filter, as you can see. The oil filter should be pretty hot, since the car should be having the oil change when it's warm, so it flows better. As you can see, this is kind of how it works. Makes it real nice just to get it loosened up, and then you can spin it off by hand. You want to just make sure you're going the right direction with it. So in this case, we're turning it counterclockwise to loosen it and take it off. Okay, at this point, just make sure that your oil pan, or the catch pan's underneath it. You are going to get some oil down here, so it happens. But just remember that this oil filter can be pretty hot, so you want to be careful about that. And you want to try to catch it as it finally comes off and hold it upright, so you're not just dumping it and then dump it down into the pan. Now, something that's very important, you want to watch this seal. Make sure that it came off with the oil filter. Come back up and look at where the oil filter goes on. Make sure it is not on there. Sometimes they will stick on there, you won't realize it, and you put another filter on and it'll spray. Now, something important about these oil filters, of course, you want to check the part number. This one's the FL820S, and you want to make sure that it's the same as the old one. And because I have actually gone and pulled these out of the box and it's had the wrong one in there. I don't know what had happened in the store or whatnot. So you want to verify that it is the right part number. And you'll also notice if you buy different brands of filters, sometimes they're taller, sometimes they're smaller and fatter. They look different. So you might freak out that you have the wrong one. But the main thing is you want to make sure that the whole seal here is exactly the same. So you want to take your new one and place it directly on top of the old one, and they should line up perfectly. And so you can even see the oil mark that it leaves by doing that. Now with the new filter, you're going to want to take some of this nice oil. I changed the oil on this car every like 1,000 miles, so it's clean. You can use new oil if you want, you can use the old oil. But basically what you want to do is just lube up this new seal. Just make sure that it's wet. It doesn't have to be too bad, but dip your finger in it. Just make sure you have it nice and wet right here so it'll form a nice new seal. Okay, so now that you have that seal all lubed up, you can feed it up in here. And you just want to be very careful that you don't cross thread this. So you want to get it flat, give it a slight turn, and you just want to make sure that it spins freely. That way you know that it's not cross threading. And these go on hand tight, okay? Quick story, when I was 16 and doing my first oil change on my 97 Mustang V6, I put this on and I tightened it down with the oil filter wrench, and it sprayed oil everywhere because it crushed that oil seal. So, moral of the story, this only goes on hand tight. Of course you don't want it loose, and that's why when we start the car we're going to get under here and make sure there's no leaks. But you just want to get it on pretty much as tight as you can get it by hand. And that's as far as you want to go with it. Okay, now we're going to come back over here to our oil drain plug. As you remember, we just kind of put it in temporarily because the oil filter was out of range. And we're going to open this back up again. And as you can see, just from the oil accumulating and some of the pressure involved when you take off the filter, you'll have some more oil that's coming out of here. So we'll let this drain for a few more minutes. Okay, now is a good time to also inspect your drain plug bolt before we put it in to be done with it. And make sure it still has that washer down towards the bottom, that it's not cracked. And pretty much we're going to go ahead and put this back in. It really doesn't matter if you have every single drop of oil out of here, especially if you change your oil often. It's just going to mix in with the new oil, and you know, you'll be okay. So you can get it to pretty much stop dripping the best you can, and be very gentle threading this in as well. Want to make sure you don't cross thread anything, so you want it to spin nice and free. Once it gets pretty much to the point where it's almost tight, I like to go back through here, try to get some of the oil that's still dripping out, kind of clean it up. We're going to go ahead and put this back on, and you don't want to go too tight with this either. You don't want to break it. You can look up a torque spec for it. It's going to be pretty low, probably like 15 to 20 foot-pounds. Okay, so this is on there nice and tight. I tightened it down to the point where I just felt like it was good and tight. Okay, so we pulled everything out from underneath the car. We're just going to lift it up on that passenger side to free the jack stand, and then lower the car down. Okay, now I'm kind of funny. What I like to do is set this box of oil on its head, set it on its side, just kind of let it mix around a bit because it's sitting and being stored like this. Probably not even a big deal at all. But anyway, in the room we're going to add our engine oil now. I'm doing 5W30, Mobil 1 full synthetic. And so we just have our oil funnel here, and we're just going to go ahead and pour it in quart by quart. Now you can really spend a lot of time waiting for this to drip out on each of these quarts. And so something I like to do is I just go on, I put in the 6 quarts as normal, then I take a 7th quart and I pour some of it in. That way I can go back later and take what's left in each of these and drain them back into the spare quart that I had. And it's just a faster way of doing it, and then you have a half of a quart, which is handy, especially if you have other cars that take the same oil. Then you know, you can have that extra quart to put in the other cars, or you know, especially like this car's a little bit higher mileage, so I like to add a little bit of oil when I go on longer trips. So anyway, that's what I like to do to save some time. Okay, next you want to make sure everything's good and clean there, and replace your oil cap. Make sure that it clicks. I like to set it straight up too, so anyway, just kind of an OCD thing. But anyway, replace that cap. And then, as I mentioned, this is our extra quart that I was using, and I'm just letting what's left in the rest of these drain back into it. So Next, we're ready to start the car, and we're going to listen and look for any oil leaks while we're doing that. Okay, so I'm in a nice, clean, fresh pair of shorts here and shirt. You want to make sure you don't get any of the oil on your seats. Something that you can do is if you push your foot all the way to the floor with the gas pedal, as you're starting it, it will not let the car start. And that way it can kind of prime the engine and get some of the oil flowing, especially since that oil filter is empty right now. So we're going to go ahead and push in the clutch, push in the gas all the way, and just crank it, and it won't start. Okay, now we'll let go of the gas pedal, clutch in. Okay, you want to get under there and see if you can get a visual on the oil filter. Make sure that it's not leaking on the seal. Make sure no oil is getting splattered on the ground. Okay, you want to check your oil gauge. Now, this gauge isn't very accurate. It's just basically telling you whether you have oil pressure or not. Some cars are a little better. Anyway, you just want to make sure that you have good oil pressure. Okay, so you're all set. You want to check the oil level again as you drive around, of course, on the oil dipstick. And then, as long as everything's tight here, make sure that that drain plug was on, that oil filter was on, and you should be all set. Okay, and finally, you'll just want to drain all your oil back into into the containers it came out of, or if you have a bigger jug, you can do that to make it a little easier. And then make sure you do go and take this to somewhere where it can be deposited, which should be any speed lube, or if you bought the oil from Walmart or Costco or any store there, you'll see on the receipt there's likely a tax that they charged you for, and so you have the right to take it back to them. Okay, so now we're just draining the oil back into the old containers. It helps to put them in a box or at least on some cardboard. It can be a little messy. So as you're pouring your oil back into these containers, now is a good time to figure out what's happening with your engine according to what the oil can tell you. First of all, as you start to pour it back in, you want to make sure that you're filling up as many containers as you put in. If you get to the point where you only filled up 3 or 4 quarts of oil and you're putting 6 in, then you know you may have a problem. Something along the lines of that though, here's a new container of oil, and its level ends right here at the top of that sight glass. So you don't want to top these off completely, or you're going to be having this much oil over 6 different containers that you'll think you're missing that you're not. So when you fill it up, stop as soon as it gets to the top of this line here, and then you'll know how many of these containers you're filling. The oil itself should be just a nice clear black without anything else in it. As head gaskets fail or oil coolers fail, sometimes you start to get coolant in with the oil. So you'll notice that it'll be a very bubbly kind of strange look to it. And another thing is you're dumping this out and getting it all the way into these containers. You want to pay attention to the bottom of this container and make sure there are no metal shavings. That would be a big sign that you have a rod bearing failing or some other issues that could be catastrophic. So just pay attention to what the oil looks like, how much oil you're putting back in, and look for any kind of metal shavings or something that's out of the ordinary.